Would you cover everything with a bit of soil?
No, the very small seeds we don't cover, just sow on the surface. And then we put a layer of grit on the top. This helps keep the seed moist.
Right, and then they go outside in the cold frame?
Yes, water them in and then put them in the cold frame.
Now, of course, quite a lot of things are not actually going to come true to type from seed, are they?
No.
So you would need to take cuttings.
Yes, we take quite a few cuttings of plants that we're not certain are going to come through the winter. Like this phlox Chattahoochee.
Oh yes, I know that one. That's I've seen that growing in little troughs and things. It's a super thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
we've got it growing in a trough.
And that one is just a little bit on the tender side. So just to make sure you take your cuttings. You're using a razor blade there, I note. A little bit dangerous.
Yes, it gives you a nice clean cut, which cuts out the possibility of rotting.
Yes, but quite important to be very careful.
Then we put it in fungicide, like benlate.
Benlate, yes.
And then dip it in hormone and insert it in the pan.
And what's that compost there?
This is equal parts peat and silver pearl.
Right, peat and perlite. And then, well, obviously you would normally fill up the whole of that pot, and then where would you put them?
Water them in with the fungicide, and then put them under the polythene in the greenhouse.
Well, you've got some here. Hey, when did you take these? Because these are looking really good, aren't they?
We've been taking those throughout September, and they're sitting up nicely.
Quite obviously, most of those are rooted, haven't they?
I should think so,
And
yes.
you've got yourself a tremendous number of plants there. Now, the polythene, very thin gauge polythene, is actually resting on top of the cuttings. Isn't that going to cause some sort of scorching from the sun?
Every morning we turn the polythene over to get rid of the excess moisture. And then during the day, when it's very sunny, we come and shade with newspaper.
Here's one way of dealing with a big, dark, north-facing wall. Cover it with climbers. But the success of this one is that there's not just one climber, nor two, but half a dozen at least. And there's a whole variety. There are clematis, there's climbing hydrangea, honeysuckles and jasmines and roses even. And look at this border, continuing that mass effect. Although there's very little left flowering in this border now, late in the year, it's still easy on the eye because of the foliage, the clever use of foliage, especially the big-leaved, corrugated-leaved hostas, and a variety of ferns here. But there are a few plants still in flower, plants which are late flowering anyway. And this is a rather special one. It's a white-flowered form of the toad lily. This is Tricertis hirta, and a fairly new variety called white towers. Look at the arching, hairy stems. It's a perennial, herbaceous perennial, comes from woodlands in Japan. So in the south it needs a fairly shady place. In the north it needs a little more sun. And late in the year, through October, sometimes into early November, you get these beautiful flowers which you really have to look closely at to appreciate. Each petal with a golden yellow spot at its base, and above it, on a column, pale violet anthers. Another autumn flowering plant, though one that's not often seen in gardens, is this climbing monkshood. It comes from the Altai Mountains of Asia. And its Latin name is Aconitum volubili, and volubili means twining. And that's exactly what this plant does, because it's a herbaceous climber. And the shoots move out from the soil in spring and gradually twine their way up either the branches of a neighbouring bush, or in this case, against wire netting, which is being pressed against the wall. And as you can see, by the end of the year, it's reached 10 feet high. Big, bold, deeply cut leaves. You can see how it's related to a buttercup, big buttercup-like leaves, which, as autumn advances, begin to turn to a deep beetroot purple. And at the same time, and for several weeks, loose sprays of flowers which are helmet-shaped, individual flowers like a helmet. The flower is variable in this species, but this is a particularly good deep blue form. One of my favourite areas of the Old Rectory is this spring garden. As the name suggests, in spring it's a mass of colour, mainly dwarf bulbs, like a Persian carpet. And these are followed by hellebores, and on into summer with roses and various perennials. But even now, in late autumn, there are splashes and pools of colour. Individual plants of rare allure, like this Sorbus vilmorinii. It's a Chinese tree. It was discovered by a French missionary in the wilds of western China, and it's named after a very famous French nurseryman, Vilmorin. And this is the real McCoy. There are a lot of plants in cultivation under that name which are not this tree. Elegant habit, arching branches, fern-like foliage with very small leaflets, and a beautiful backing to these fruits, pearl-like fruits in loose bunches which start red, pale to pink, and end up a white, a rosy white colour, and last into the winter. Many years ago, when I was working for a nursery, we had a tree. It was rare, it was difficult to propagate, slow growing, and in constant demand. As you can imagine, it was expensive to buy. We called it the pound an inch plant. Its name was Cornus controversa variegata. Here it is, a really nice, fairly young specimen. Now the Americans call this a very graphic name. They call it the pagoda tree, or the silver pagoda tree in this case. And you can see why. The branches are produced in layers, one upon another. Tiers of branches in walls, right up to the top. And this tree will reach something like 40, 50 feet eventually after many, many years. On top of the branches, the leaves like chips of silver, very thin, with a white, creamy white margin. And inside the leaf, in the middle of the leaf, grey and silver shades. And then as autumn advances, you have a rose suffusion creeping in, which gets richer and deeper as the season reaches its climax, when the whole plant is of silvery purple colour. It really is a tree worth saving for, and of course waiting for. So often you see clematis being grown against walls, and it sometimes comes as a surprise to see them used in other ways. As here, it's been planted against an old stump. Rather than take the stump out, they use it as a vehicle of this plant, which is very free-growing. This is Clematis Bill Mackenzie. It's named after a lovely man who used to be the superintendent of the Chelsea Physic Garden. And it's a hybrid of two wild yellow-flowered Asian species. Vigorous, easy and hardy. Dense growing, ferny foliage, and then throughout the autumn months, almost to the first frosts, you get these lantern-like flowers, beautiful, rich yellow. And the great distinction of this one, Bill Mackenzie, is that the base of that bunch of stamens in the centre are purple stained, so you have a kind of a purple-eyed effect to the yellow flower. And after the flowers, like all members of this Orientalis clematis group, they're replaced by bunches of silky seed heads which hang down rather like fluffy silvery poodle heads.